Alright, so I'm going to talk to you about changing out the air compressor, this guy right here, on a 2008 Ford Focus. Now I have a 2-liter 4-cylinder SFI engine. I have a manual transmission. But in terms of air conditioning, whether you have manual or automatic, it doesn't matter. 2008, 9, and 10 at least I know have the exact same air compressor across all transmissions, etc., etc. So that's what I'll talk about. So some of the obvious stuff, make sure you use safety precautions. I used a 2.5-ton floor jack and a jack stand. I jacked up that corner of the car, didn't have to take off the wheel, and there was enough space to get in there. And speaking, and then I also, at some points I use rubber gloves. Of course, I have glasses, but wear goggles, whatever. The nice thing about rubber gloves, it will save you from, I've got a bunch of scratches still from when I did it, they're healing. I didn't wear gloves for a good chunk of it. Wear the gloves, it'll save your arms, it'll save you on the grease. Plus you're working with refrigerant, power steering fluid, radiator fluid, just as a precaution against your hands, against anything, your hands, eyes, face, whatever, breathing. Just protect yourself. So, okay, so the whole strategy here, I'm hoping that what you take away from my little video here is that I went through a lot of trials and tribulations. This thing is not easy to get out. If you read Shilton's, it says, oh, undo a couple bolts, undo these, remove it, we're done. It isn't that easy, at least not the way in my experience. So I'm hoping to save you some agony and streamline your own experience so it's that much easier. So to begin with, make sure you disconnect the battery cable. And like I said, jack up the car. The strategy overall is just to create space for you to work. Things are jammed in there. If you notice on this guy here, there's 2 bolts on the bottom and 1 on the top that you have to take out. Everything is buried and jammed together on this car. Nothing is easy to get at. So on top of the compressor is a power steering pump. You can get at the bottom 2 bolts on the compressor from underneath the car, but the top single bolt, you're going to have to do something with that power steering pump to get at that darn bolt. I watched a lot of YouTube videos as I did this. Like I said, I was a trial and tribulation type process for me. I'm putting links below for some of the YouTube videos that really helped me out, and I'll mention those as I go along. You've got fuses and relays in this car, and I've got a link to a super cool video, super easy video that shows you where the fuses are. There's also a clutch relay fuse, etc., etc. So underneath your dashboard, driver's side, there's a fuse box. There's 2 fuses in there. Check them both. And then under the hood, on the driver's side near the back firewall, is another fuse box. There's an AC fuse in there, an AC relay, an AC diode. This video tells you about where they all are. Check them and make sure so you don't spend hundreds of dollars, time and agony, misery changing this thing out when that's all it was a $2 fuse. The other thing is you're going to need to get a hold of some manifold pressure gauges and a vacuum pump. But when you get your hands in so you can go to the auto store, O'Reilly, AutoZone, etc., and they'll loan it to you for free. You put down a deposit, you get it back, you get your deposit back. I end up buying those things at Harbor Freight. If you want to go that route, go to Harbor Freight, sign up for their email list for coupons. When they give you a 20% coupon, then go buy your pump because it's a $90 pump, but after the coupon it's only $70, so why not save money? The other thing is the loaner pumps typically are 1.8 CFM, which is okay pressure, it'll do the job, but the one at Harbor Freight is 2.5, so it's got a little bit more beef to it. Anyway, and you can use them when you do a brake job to bleed the brakes, those pumps. Anyways, the other thing is to figure out if this is bad, and I'm actually going to put a link to a video below on diagnosing your air conditioning system, is if you put on your pressure gauges to the high and low port, run the engine, and see what they tell you. And in the video, it'll tell you what readings tell you, or what, and it would tell you what reading means this thing's most likely bad. So, okay, so disconnect the battery cable. You're going to have to take off the Serpentine Belt, and that's the first video down below. It's a nice video on how to take off a Serpentine. Okay, this should give me a pretty good angle here. So, You want to take this guy off right here. It's your radiator coolant. Two little 10mm bolts, and then pull it off the right here and get it out of the way. Remember, take off your negative terminal. You don't want the engine to accidentally start or something happens while your hands are in there or underneath. Then underneath the car, right underneath here, is your engine splash guard. It's just a bunch of little 7mm bolts, super easy. There's a couple over here, a couple in the middle, a couple over here, probably one in the wheel well right here. And so just take them off, no problem. Okay, the next thing I took off is this grill. And it's super easy. See these guys right here? These four little things? These are little plastic rivets. You can buy a package of these at the auto store for like $7-8. Screwdriver, pop them out, then this thing just comes out, set aside. When you do that, then it becomes real easy to take off your headlight. So you got a screw here, a little 10mm. You might have one here, and you might have one here maybe. But once you take this off, there's one right underneath here. Take those out, take it off, unscrew the bulbs, move it aside. Now you have some space and get your hand in underneath this guy right here. Okay, here's where the fun begins. This is your power steering pump reservoir, which is bolted to the power steering pump, which you can't see. My finger's on the pulley. So there's 4 bolts that take off the power steering pump. 2 up top and 2 down beneath. So you can get a 3/8 drive with an extension, take off 1 bolt. I'd use a 1/4" drive with an extension. They're all 10mm on this bolt. Take out those 2 bolts. This actually just pops out. Also on the bottom of this is a hose with a clamp. Undo the clamp, pull the hose off, and take this thing out. Then you've got access to the power steering pump. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. It's kind of hard to see, but right down here you'll see a little wire that's plugged in to what's called the pressure switch, and that pressure switch screws into the high pressure hose on the very bottom of the pump. It's like directly underneath. I would advise taking off before you finish off taking the power steering pump, again, you'll need room to get access to the 2 lower bolts. So take the little connector off. Be gentle, be careful, be patient. You can easily break the plastic. I kind of did. Just a little screwdriver and a tab, it will come out. The pressure switch is just a 14mm bolt, nut. That's the fitting, and you can probably go right through this opening right here that you created. And now once you get started to unscrew, then just take your hand and unscrew it and take it out. It's just a little pressure switch. Now you have, again, a little bit more room to work. Then you can go after the 2 bottom bolts. Actually, I take that back. You want to take off that pressure hose, high pressure hose that goes directly underneath the power steering pump. It's an 18mm. You can try to work on it from up top here. People have tried flare wrenches, they've tried the claw wrenches, they've tried the flare wrench. If it comes off, great, but you can go right in with a wrench and grab it. Now if it comes off, hallelujah, you just made your entire job easier, because, well, on the bottom you can get access to this bolt. The problem is this little guy is about that far, not even about that far, butted up right next to that stupid line. So you have no room, but if you can get the line off, then you can easily get at that bolt, unbolt this stupid compressor, this power steering pump, and just take it out. Life is good. If, however, you are unable to get the line off like I was, I tried everything, it just wouldn't come, and I couldn't. I finally went to plan B. Well, what is plan B? Well, that's the next video down below in the description. It's a nice little video on how to get access to that little bolt. So getting that darn power steering pump either off or out, depending whether you can get the pressure line off, again, that's an 18mm, would just make your life a whole lot easier. I couldn't get it off, so I had to do that little technique in the YouTube video, and I got out of the way. It makes a world of difference. Okay, so once you get that out, now it's time to take this darn compressor out. Now, I'm just going to recommend something right now. Eventually, I found that the lower radiator hose will be in your way. This is a good time to take it off. It just, one end connects to the thermostat, the other end and the lower part of the radiator right by the compressor actually. Take this darn thing off. Yeah, you'll lose some radiator fluid, you have to refill it later, but getting that compressor out, once you remove all the bolts, you need this dumb thing off. At least I did. Okay, so let's talk about getting this compressor out. Okay, again, if you notice, there's 3 bolts on the bottom and 1 on the top. To get the bottom bolts, you have to get underneath the car. It's fairly good access. You can probably use a 1/4 inch ratchet, maybe on 1 bolt, and probably a 3/8 drive on the other. Here's the trick. This bolt, here's how the compressor sits in the car. It sits like this in the, like this. This fire bolt, meaning this bolt right here, that's actually got an extension on it, a little threaded bolt that comes out actually. What's the purpose of that? What's the deal with that? Well, actually, the high pressure hose underneath the car, along with some air conditioning hoses, they have a little bracket on it, and that bracket fits in that bolt. It's held on by a little 10mm nut. So you gotta get that nut off first, which you're probably gonna need a long socket 10mm. That's what I use because it's longer. Get that nut off. Once you get the nut off, take the bracket off, get the hose out of the way, and then you can take off the actual bolt. And then this one, just use a regular ratchet, 10mm, it'll come off. And then because your power steering pump is out from the top of the car, you can take out the 3rd bolt, this one, top one, from the top of the car. Then, and because this is out of the way too, you have a little extra room. Now it's time to take off your air conditioning fitting. So before you do that, make sure you take off the electrical connector. Be patient, use care, don't break it. It's just a little tab, it pushes in. You probably use a little screwdriver, it'll slip right off. Okay, now that's done. 13mm for these 2 bad boys. And you can do it from the top. It's kind of a bad angle because they're slanted from your perspective, but you can quite easily get a 13mm on there. You might need a longer socket, a 13mm long socket, because these are pretty good sized bolts. So once you get them off, you should be able to wiggle it, jostle it, should slip right off. If it's frozen on there, I used a combination of liquid wrench for a while. Mine weren't, but when I worked on the compressor, they were. One of them was. So I let it soak for a while, like liquid wrench, WD-40. Took a very small hammer, lightly tapped. Did that a couple times, and it came off. On these, fortunately, they just came right off. When you get the fittings off your compressor on the hose, you know, the hose has a fitting that fits in these, one hole here, one hole here. By the way, they're 2 different size holes, so you can't mess them up. Go get an air conditioning gasket and O-ring kit. They cost about 15 bucks. It's well worth it. You'll get a bunch of these things here, different size holes, and then a whole bunch of O-rings, because you're gonna have to change out the O-ring and you have to change out the gasket. And don't make the mistake of forgetting to change out your gasket. Just simply fits like that. Okay, so you've done all that, you've got this out, and now you're halfway done. Life is good, right? So here's an opportunity for you. Like I said, you might as well change out if you have an older Serpentine Belt, change it out. But the same goes for the thermostat. You notice there's only, see if you can see them there, 2 bolts, 3 bolts, little, I think they're 10mm or 8, something like that. You'll figure it out. Because the power steering pump and the compressor is off, you have very easy access. You just take off the hose. You've already taken off the radiator hose from here. Go ahead and change it out. If you don't, and you try to do it when everything's back together, it's a nightmare. And there's videos that tell you how to do it, but you have to get way up and you don't have any room. Here, you have all the room in the world, 3 little things. Go ahead and do it. This has cost me 27 bucks. It's a standalone unit, just off and on. Okay. Same for the radiator hose, you might as well get a new one, right? Okay, so now we're at that point where we're gonna put things together. Now just a tip about getting this thing out of the car. You can try to get it out from the top of the car, but those darn AC hoses and that dumb pressure line is kind of in your way. I took it out from underneath and didn't have too much trouble. And that's why you want to take this off, because if you try to take it off like I did with this on, it won't come out because this is in the way. Okay, so how do we put the sucker back on? One little tip for you. Those bolts that come out are like that long, 10 millimeters. Stick them in before you put that thing back up in there and are gonna bolt it in place. So put the bolts in. I know they'll jostle and maybe slide, might even come out, but if you do it right, they won't. It's not too hard. This is pretty heavy to sit under the car with a hand or whatever. You just gotta get one of the bolts in and just do it from the bottom, because you're already on the bottom. You're not gonna be able to get, I mean, maybe you can get it from the top. I did it from the bottom and got a bolt in, so you can hold it up, and then you got more leverage, and then you get the other one in. Remember, the bolt on this side here, the far side, back side of this thing, has the bolt with the longer end on it, so that the bracket underneath. So you bolt this in, just get them started on the bottom, then go at the top and get this one in and bolt that in, and then get, then you can go through and tighten, and while it's in nice and solid, then you can put the bracket on underneath. And it's a little bit tricky because, as usual, you don't have much room, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and did you change out your thermostat? I sure hope you did. Anyways, now you can either put this back on, which I did before I put the power steering pump. I won't really be in your way for that type of thing. So I just put the top part on the thermostat, and I did the bottom part at the very, very end. Now, you notice this has an arc in it, so make sure you put it on the right way. And initially I put it on the wrong way, and then realized, oh, it shouldn't be buttoned up against the engine. I got the wrong side, so I had to face it so that it curves around the engine. Okay, so you've got this bad boy bolted in. Now is the time to put the fittings back on here. Now, just a tip. Air conditioning systems take oil. In my car, my year 2008, which also be 9 and 10, it's PAG 46 air conditioning oil. If you don't put the oil in, good way to blow this up. Just like your engine, you don't put oil in the engine, it blows up. Same for the compressor. This is a really good time to put this oil in. So what I did is, while this thing is bolted in, got my funnel, poured in the oil. Went to the other one, poured in oil. And you can put oil before you put it back in the car, but then you jostle the thing and tip it, you might lose some oil. Takes 4.5 ounces of PAG 46 oil. That's how much goes in the system. Now in my case, I changed out the compressor a couple of days before this guy, and I put some oil in there, so I didn't have to put in exactly 4.5, something less, because the total amount in the system between everything should be 4.5. Okay, so when you put these on, remember, as a reminder, put new O-rings on the ends of the fittings, and put these around here like that type of thing, or you can stick them right on the fitting too. Rub a little oil around the O-rings. They help do a little better seal. I got that from a YouTube video, so I did it. When you put these on, they should go pretty much straight on. Remember, you're at kind of a bad angle, so you have to jostle. You shouldn't have to like ram it and pound it. If it's a little bit, you can tap. I tap lightly, but also lightly so you don't chip something or rough up something you shouldn't rough up. But they will go on. They're 13 millimeter nuts. Remember, long socket, and you should be able to get them on. Crank pretty tight. You don't have to like overkill it, but put some good tension on there, so tighten them pretty good. So okay, so that's on, and make sure you reconnect your electrical. It only goes one way, so shouldn't force it, and you'll see when you're in there. Not a ton of room, but you have enough room to get your fingers, and you get your light right, boom, it'll work. Okay, so now it's time to talk about putting the power steering pump back on. That's always the bad boy when you're trying to change out the compressor, because that one little nut. Now, if you were fortunate enough to get the stupid thing off, the power steering pressure hose off, keep in mind there's 2 bolts on the bottom, 2 bolts on the top, and the 2 bolts on the top hold the reservoir in place. So put the bottom bolts on, and then I would screw in the pressure switch, remember 14 millimeters. And then I put the electrical connection, because those two things are so jammed up against the air, whatever, vent, whatever, plastic thing for the air on the manifold on the engine, that now is the time to put it on before you put the reservoir on. And you can put your hose on the bottom on before or after. Probably easier if you do it before, because you got more room, right? You can twist things. So you got the bottom bolts in, then you can just put the top bolts in and then tighten everything down, type of thing. Remember, on the reservoir, it takes 2 little O-rings. So before you go slapping it back in there, put the O-rings on there, and you might as well put a little oil around it too. If you're like me and you did not disconnect weren't able to, or did not disconnect the high pressure line underneath it, so you slide it in. This is where it helps to have an extra set of hands. So the process we did is, we got one guy holding it up there, the other guy got the lower right bolt in, just enough, a little bit, so that you can kind of rest the power steering pump, so it's not so hard to deal with. Then he pushed it up against the holes the way they should be, and then I, using the technique in that video, went underneath. Remember, you got like that much room to get this in there, just enough to get on the bolt. I got underneath and did 1 1/4 turns. And I first took my hand and got it in there, and then I got this thing on there. And while I'm doing this, I reached around underneath on the other side, and again, push this against the bolt so it doesn't come off, but also the fingernail and the ratchet, because if you don't, the bolt spins with the ratchet and then it unthreads and you have to start over, and it's very aggravating. But we got both them in, got them started, and then I put in the pressure switch. Actually, I didn't. I put the reservoir in first. Realized I'm going to have a hard time getting the pressure switch put in, so I had to take the reservoir off and do it again, which is kind of a pain. All right, so do it the right way. Put the pressure switch in, put the electrical connector on, because they're at such a bad angle, hard to get at. You're done with that. Then pop the reservoir back in, then put in the 2 bolts. Now you've got all 4 bolts in there, and the thing ain't going nowhere. So tighten, 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 tighten. And you know it is cross pattern. Tighten, 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 tighten. So they're nice and snug and nice and tight. You got your pressure switch already in, you got the connector already on, you already put the hose on the bottom with the clamps. You're golden. Okay, so you have the compressor in, you have the power steering pump, you got all the hoses hooked up. Now you got to put that serpentine belt back on. So remember, you watched that video from before, right? So I kind of threaded it through the top, like this, and then it got underneath. Worked one hand with the wrench for the tensioner. The idler pulley, which is the pulley just above the compressor, that one always would slip a little bit on me. It would be off center. At one point I had someone help me, then I figured out I could lay flat on my back, head facing back, work the wrench and get my hand up there, just enough room to get it on, then tighten it up, put the tensioner back again, release the tensioner, kind of a thing. Yeah, so you got a new belt on. It isn't too hard, but just watch the video. And that's also another reason why I say you might want to consider the tensioner tool, so you can have someone from the top working it while you work underneath, so you got 2 hands. It'd be that much easier. Okay, so there's one step that you need to do before you recharge your AC system and turn on that engine, etc., etc., etc. Remember, you took out your radiator hose, right? So you lost a bunch of radiator fluid, and you lost probably all or most of your power steering fluid. So you gotta get power steering fluid, put some in the power steering pump. I initially thought I could get away with putting fluid, 50-50 mix, in the overflow tank for the radiator, and it would work. Not true. My engine would go all the way over to the right and just overheat. So what you have to do is you have to get the air out of the system, your radiator system. It's super easy. Make sure your engine is cool, and it's cooled down, and it's cold when you do this. When the engine is cold, do not ever take off that cap with the engine hot, because there's pressure in there then you've got hot radiator fluid spewing all over like Old Faithful, all over you, basically scalding water all over you. That's why goggles and gloves. Okay, when it's cool, you can simply take off your radiator cap and then add fluid in there, turn on your engine, turn on the heater to full blast, your cap is off, heater's on, turn on the engine, and then you can start adding fluid, and then as you add fluid, it'll go up and then go down, go up and go down, and you'll see air bubbles come to the surface and pop out. Do that over and over again, and eventually you get to a point where you can no longer add any more fluid and you don't get any more air bubbles. And turn your engine off and let it cool down, then put your radiator cap back on, and then on your reservoir, your overflow tank, only fill it up to that line that says max. You don't want to put too much in there, otherwise it'll screw things up. Okay, now follow the instructions in the video I have below on your recharging your AC system. Just do what's in there. It works great. It's step by step. It's beautiful. One tip for you. When I did mine, I put this in. I was doing everything. I was adding refrigerant. First I vacuumed, then I add refrigerant. And this wasn't turned on. And I thought, oh my God, I screwed up. There's an electrical problem. Oh, I put in a bum. Remember, I got a used compressor. Put a bum one in. Crap, I don't want to go through this again. I ruminated, read online, this and that. That's when I check my relays and fuses. You should do it first thing before anything. Simple things first. So then I realized from this video, he just mentioned it casually. I'm going to mention it in a big way. There's a low pressure switch. This thing doesn't turn off unless, this thing doesn't turn on unless there's at least a certain amount of refrigerant. It's got to build up pressure. So don't panic when it doesn't come on right away. It might take a number of minutes before it turns on. And you know it's turned on because as the engine's running, the pulley spins, and when it's not on, the clutch doesn't spin. This is the clutch. You can see it. You can't see it straight on, but you can see it from the top, this little clutch here. Once that starts spinning, this starts spinning, it's on. Then you see the pressure gauges. The low pressure will go from like 80, 85 pounds all the way back to like 30, 35. It will increase up to 40, 45 until you get to the right amount of refrigerant. The high pressure port, that reading will go from 50, then 70, then 100, 120, 150, 175, 190, 200, right? 18 ounces of refrigerant is how much you need for the Ford Focus, 2008, 9, 10. Follow those instructions. But just remember, be patient before this thing. Okay, so you got everything in, you recharge your AC, you got nice cold air coming out, you got a new Serpentine Belt, you got a new radiator hose, you got a new thermostat. Life is good. So now all you gotta do is go ahead and put that headlight back in. Just make sure you screw the 3 bulbs in the right spot. Just half turn, half turn, half turn. Stick it in there, bolt it in. There's one high, 1 or 2 high and 1 low. And then that grill, literally that grill just slips right in, and they're held on by 4 of these plastic rivets. So stick them in the hole, push it down, hole, stick it, push it down, put it in the hole, push it down, hole, push it down. And now you got your car all back together. Remember, you've already put your Serpentine Belt cover on, I think. Well, if you haven't, you got to get under the car and put that on too. Remember, if you're under the car, got your hands in there, take that battery terminal off, play it safe, don't risk it. Okay, so now the thing, what I did is I just unjacked the car, brought it down, let it run for a few minutes, then I drove around the neighborhood. Do I have any leaks? Is my car overheating? It better not at this point. Do I have enough power steering pump? Any squeaks I shouldn't hear? Any grinds I shouldn't hear? Do I have nice cold air coming out? Etc., etc., etc. And if you're like me and you got everything eventually correct, life is good. You got air again. And this thing is changed out. All right, more power to you. And that's my process for changing the air conditioning compressor on the 2008 Ford Focus.